I guess one of the big hurdles that kind of cause a division in Black unity is the is the way that modern Black people identify themselves with based on European standards. So I think that causes a lot of confusion, and it's the way that the Western people or the non-blacks identify themselves. It's not. It's a flawed system. One example of it is describing genetics based on land and country or continent. So it's like when they say, okay, when you go to like a Black American and a Black American does the genetics, and they say, well, okay, you are 10% Nigerian, 50% sub-Saharan, all these different kind of descriptions. The reason why they're describing you as a location is because the way that they identify genetics is based upon where that specific genetics is dominant in. So if they say if you do your ancestry and then you find out like you're 90% African, is because when they compare the genetics of that person to where there was a large percentage of that genetics on the earth, they will find that in Africa. So it's like if they were to go to Asia now and they did the genetic like a test on an Asian person and they find out that person you could trace them back to a specific kind of genetic a specific kind of gene, and they look on the earth and say, okay, where is this gene predominant? It's in Africa, so okay, that's an African genetic. But that's flawed, because I think that's where a lot of the confusion comes in, which is why you might have a lot of people in the diaspora saying I am not African, because what the African they're talking about is not, they're separating the genetic aspect of things with, they're comparing it to the current state of like of or the current idea of what it means to be African, right? So that's why you might have a Black person be more proud of their Asian or European heritage versus their African heritage, because that whenever they think about Europe, they're thinking about the modernization of Europe, and they're like, okay, I don't mind assimilating with that, but what does Africa have? Africa. So in their mind, Africa doesn't really have anything to be proud of, so they don't want to really associate with that. If they viewed Africa in the same light that they viewed, let's say, Europe or Asia, they would, all those Black Americans that are saying we're not from Africa, they would want to be African. It's just a good example of it. It's kind of like the current state of Argentina. Argentina, is a country in Latin America that was also involved in the slave trade, just like every other American country. But after the advent of like the slave trade and like it started to die down, they had like a 30% population of African people in there, or Black people in there. But they were trying to develop. They're trying to develop, trying to catch up, just like every country at that time were racing to civilization. The US was trying to advance in its own way, the British were trying to advance in their own way based upon everything, that all the resources they had gained through slave trade. They were trying to build up a civilization that would be powerful in the future. And so the Argentinians were thinking like, okay, how can we develop, you know, maybe, if they're thinking, if we have too much Black people in here because of their racist and stupid ideology, Black people are not intelligent. Black people are not advanced. So having a 30% population of Black people is going to slow down our advancement in civilization. So they started to ethnically cleanse Argentina of Black people. Where right now there was I think 2% population of Black people, and back then there was like 30%, and they did it in the short, like they reduced the population in such a short period of time through like evil means, and they started to like allow the immigration of people from Europe, so that now when if you look at the average Argentinian, they will claim to be European based because of like, oh, the majority of our ancestry traces back to Europe, so we are European. They didn't want that African label of like Africa has nothing. So I think a lot of that rejection of Black people in diaspora claiming to be African is not because of there was anything wrong per se with that identity, except from the way that it appears in modern worlds. Like Africa is not, Africa is savage. Africa is is low. They are underdeveloped. So I don't want to identify with that because there was nothing to be proud of in being African. That's why they reject it, But they can't change. The genetics is the same. It's just we're identifying that genetics as African because that's the place where there was a large concentration. We're not going to say the genetic is American because the majority of the kind of genetics that is in America is not that genetics. We're not going to say this genetics is European, even if black people were there first. We're not going to say this genetics is European because the majority of Europeans have a specific genetics that is, let's say, identifying with that particular place. So we're not going to say this genetics is European, even though there's black people there, because there's not enough black people there for me to claim that this is European. You see, but where can I find the majority of black people in Africa? So this genetics is African. You see, and that's what ends up happening. And then you can see that this rejection is based upon self-hate because I was just thinking if you or sure there was like it is true that black people were in America, black people were originally in America. So a black person here might say, well, I'm not from Africa, I'm from here. Like, why can't you, instead of saying I'm not from Africa, I'm from here, why can't you actually say that the same genetics that you claim was already here is the same genetics that is in Africa? So why are you rejecting Africa? Why don't you say, oh, well, it's like the genetics of Africans is the same as the genetics that you claim is from here. So why don't you look at the bigger picture beyond I'm not from Africa, or instead of saying I'm not from Africa, why don't you say, well, my genetics encompasses both Africa and America? Why don't you say the genetics of Africans is the same as the genetics of Americans? It's not really about if you're African or not. It's more about if you claim to be African, you feel like you are diminishing your value as a human being. So in a way, the black people that say those things are actually dehumanizing African people and devaluing them as human beings. They are saying they are less than, so I don't want to identify with them. It's not really so until we start seeing the so-called FBAs starting to address the actual genetic similarities between themselves and Africans, then their entire movement is rooted in nothing. And it also goes back to what you talked about, like with the culture. It's like when you say, okay, we've been here for a long time. Okay, if you've been here for this time, what is your culture that you identify with? Then now you want to start identifying with American Indian culture. And then the Indians don't claim you. Because apart from that, in essence, you don't really claim them too because you don't even practice their practice. You don't practice their spirituality. You don't practice their way of life. You're not living in a reservation. You're not trying to go out there and hunt animals or dress the way that they dress and do the things that they do. You just want to not be, you're just actually just rejecting Africa. You don't really care about being American Indian. You just don't want to be African because of the way it looks. You see, and then another level of this identity crisis, which is caused by the way that the non-blacks identify is the people identifying with countries. That's another level of like, what does it mean when you say I'm Nigerian or I am Ghanaian or I am American? Your identity cannot be tied to a construct that was recently created when the cultures are far deeper than that. Like it's like you cannot say something like African culture. African is only a recent development. These cultures have existed for hundreds and thousands of years before even Africa was thought of. So it's like you cannot be claiming your identity should be rooted in something that is historical, not something that is your identity is tied into deeper history, not recent history. So why are you trying to stop at being African? Why don't you go deeper than that? People who claim to be African first or claim to be Nigerian first before their actual tribe. It's like, oh, I'm African or I'm Nigerian. Why are you not claiming your tribe first? When you think about it, like people should go about claiming their tribe first. Like your idea, it's like if I was to ask you, oh, what's your name? Are you going to say my name is Nigerian? No, you're going to go with the first identity, which is your name, and then you can say, oh, where is that name from? Then you can go to the tribe, and then where is that tribe from? Then you can go to the country. You're not going to go about say, hey, hello everybody, I'm Nigerian. Like, no, hello everybody. It's like the first thing that you say, and that's why our names always tied to our culture. Because when you say your name, it should be able to tell everybody what tribe you're from, where that tribe is located, what the culture of that tribe is. So if I was to go out there and say my name is Fermi, you're gonna think automatically, oh, you are Yoruba. That's a Yoruba name, and then it tells it even like just me going by saying my name is Oluwafemi, it tells a lot of stories about not just me being Yoruba, but also the religious colonization of Yoruba. Because historically, Yoruba people wouldn't call themselves Oluwafemi; they would call themselves by the names of the deities. So my name in the past would have not been Oluwafemi, because Oluwa was something that happened when people stopped identifying with the traditional religions and they didn't want to go by like the deities. They started going by Oluwa, which is kind of almost like a general name for God. But people, there was nothing like Oluwa back in the day. People would identify by the deities like Shango, like Oya, like Ogun. So my name in the Basque probably would have been Ogun Fermi, which is identifying with the deities. So when you hear Oluwafemi, it tells a story of even colonization. It tells you a little bit more about. So it's like when I say my name is Oluwafemi, oh, are you Nigerian? No, before I'm Nigerian, or before, if you want to even call me Nigeria, before I'm that, I am Yoruba. And when you even say being Yoruba also tells a story of colonization, because Yoruba now is almost like a general term for different tribes that are in the western part of Nigeria. But Yoruba is a blanket term. The people that were originally Yoruba were the Oyo people. So in the past, if somebody said they were Yoruba, they would not think just a group of people, they would think of a specific tribe. Now, Yoruba has become a blanket term for a bunch of different tribes, including Ijebu people, Ijesha people, Oyo people, Ibadan people, all these different tribes now under Yoruba. So it tells a story even beyond that. As well as like, okay, if I say my name should be able to lead you back to me just coming from the Ijebu land. You see that? And that is like, Ijebu is a tribe on its own, just like the way the Ibadan people, they have their own tribe and all these different, so it's like, it goes, a lot of this cognitive dissonance comes from the way that we address ourselves, which all the way goes back to our dependence on the non-black system in the way that we live and the way that we identify ourselves. And I'm talking about Oluwafemi. Imagine someone that is named John. Do you know how, like, just hearing like a black person calling himself John Stark, like, your identity is lost on so many levels. On Oluwafemi, there's so much identity lost already in that tribal name, right? Oluwafemi tells you a story of a lost identity to a huge aspect, talking about like the Yoruba aspect of things, and then the Nigerian aspect of things, and the religious aspect of things. But so, imagine a black person, oh, my name is John Stark. There's nothing. Like, that doesn't guide you towards your true identity in any way. It just that guides you to a whole. If you were to trace the history of John Stark, you probably find yourself back in Europe. You see, but you're not worried about even addressing the identity. All you care about is, I'm not African. While your name is my name is John Phillips, but you're not African. Like, bro, you worry about even like rejecting your name first before rejecting being African. You see, but that's the level of self-forgetfulness that we are in.
Exactly. That's why the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, the Nation of Islam, they say, hey, we don't know who we are. We just X, And they started there, you know what I'm saying? And their identity became that of we are the gods of the universe, maker on the cream of the planet Earth. You see, they pumped that in from the inside out. They were really on point, the Nation of Islam, in multiple ways. Because once you go into that, you go beyond tribes and borders, because you are maker on the cream of the planet Earth, God of the universe. You see, that takes you to a whole nother level of self-awareness, and this is another thing that we are. Another level that the Nation of Islam really was on point.